Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Miller. Every week, I chat with fascinating people from all walks of life in order to bring you knowledge, inspiration, and insight. If you enjoy the show, you can support it by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with a friend. This is the Jeremy Miller Podcast. Pierce, Showe, welcome to the podcast, man. Glad to have you here.
Dude, I am super excited to be here. This has been a little bit of a time in the making, and I'm grateful to know you. I'm grateful to call you a friend, man, and thanks so much for having me on the show. I've been so inspired by what you're doing and your coaching, your content, and everything you're doing. So thanks for being an inspiration to me.
Dude, I appreciate that, man. That means a lot, especially coming from someone like yourself. And the feelings are very mutual. You're inspiring me every time we have a conversation. I'm like, man, I gotta get my shit together because this guy's making me look bad out here. Dude, so, okay, you just finished up Ultraman Arizona.
Yeah.
I've been very impatiently waiting the last couple of weeks to hear about this whole story. So just let me hear the whole thing. I want to hear it from start to finish, and we'll kind of dive into all that stuff. But
yeah, and just so the listeners know, Jeremy and I talk like about every week, but more than that. And several times Jeremy's been like, I want to ask you this, but I want to save it for the podcast. So you guys are really getting the first time me, sharing the Ultraman experience and everything with Jeremy. So it's real fresh, and I'm super excited to talk about it. So just to set up some context for it.
Yeah, what is Ultraman?
Yeah.
Is that where you're going to start?
Yeah. And like a couple years ago, I'll explain, I was in this place where, and we'll get into it a little bit later, where I left college and I was working and just trying to figure things out. And I saw a post by a guy named Jesse Itzler, who we both follow. Amazing, inspiring guy, does a lot of cool things.
He's a badass.
Yeah. And he posted about training for Ultraman. And so I looked it up, and I had never heard of this thing called an Ultraman. I'd heard of an Ironman, and I had wanted to do one at the time. And I see him post about this, so I look it up, and the application, I'm about to apply because I just want to like go for this thing. And they had an age requirement that you had to be like either 18 or 21 or something. This was like several years ago, and I was below the age requirement, and I couldn't do it. But yeah, so a couple years later, I ended up getting into this race. The race is 3 days long. It starts with a 6.2 mile swim. Jeez. And then you change and you get on your bike, and then you go 90 miles on your bike, riding through these mountains, and it's all in Arizona. And then you go home, you finish and you go home, and then you get up the next day and you ride your bike 171.4 miles. So that's like a long day. The max time you have to do that is 12 hours. And then you go to bed and you get up a third day for a double marathon, which is 52.4 miles. So 3 very full days, and you got to do them back to back to back. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I'm just, whatever questions you have about it, more than happy to answer. But
I have so many.
I just wanted to preface that with that because, yeah, it's a very long race and there's a lot that goes into it. And I had done, a couple 100-mile races before then, but nothing like back to back to back. So it changes things. There's complexity because of the swimming, the biking, the running, all that. So yeah, let's fire away.
First, how did the just experience go? Maybe we should start with training. Like, what does training look like for an event like that? Like, how far out did you start? Everything. I want to know everything.
Yeah. So, when people ask me that, like someone asked me that the other day, like, what does my training look like? Or I have another challenge that I'm doing later, and they're like, when does training start? And I'm like, training started like 4 years ago, man. Because like I really believe fitness is this cumulative effect of and I try and encourage people to do this, is get away from the 90 days to losing 10 pounds or losing 20 pounds or however many pounds you want to lose, and look at it as as this lifelong pursuit of like sculpting your ideal self. So just a quick backstory, because I didn't go from nothing to Ultraman.
Right.
And I'll explain the story here briefly. So I was never the best athlete growing up. I was never the best in sports, but I played lacrosse growing up, and I was pretty decent. And so my hometown, lacrosse is huge, and every day of lacrosse tryouts before the practice, like at the first thing we'd do was a 5K. So, at that time in high school, you think, oh man, a 5K, 3 miles, like that's the worst thing ever. Like, well, how are we going to do this?
It feels like a marathon when you're that young and you don't have the perspective.
Exactly. You have no perspective. Like running 20, 30 minutes straight, like what? Yeah, so we do this, and I quickly realized that I was one of the better ones on the team at running this 5K. And whether that's because I was really the best or because people didn't try super hard because we had a tryout that later, who knows? But I was one of the better ones at that. I finished in the front. So what does that do to you as a kid? It gives you confidence.
Yeah.
And then people start noticing that. So like you feel kind of special because you're the one that is a freshman running with the seniors. And I think that really set me down a path of like pursuing running, and because I had found something that I was pretty decent at. And so that led me to do a half marathon. And
how long after you ran in school for soccer and then till that first half marathon? What was that time frame?
Yeah, so freshman year I did so I started to notice that, I mean, obviously like freshman year when I was doing tryouts, but really I put it together that, oh, this is actually could be something more closer to my senior year. And I did my first half marathon August of my senior year of high school, so that was 2019.
There's not a lot of high schoolers, I feel like, that run half marathons.
No, so that's the thing too. And the reason I did that is because I had a friend growing up who's like, I think I might do a half marathon. And we were talking about it, and I was like, I was actually thinking the same thing too. So I took that as confirmation that I was supposed to do it. And he actually ended up not doing it then. but I signed up for one. And I think I thought I may be able to do it because I saw my mom growing up do marathons. She didn't like push it on me ever, but I saw it was possible.
That leading by examples is so powerful.
Yeah.
I think that's more impactful than like saying, hey, I'm going to run a half marathon and you're going to do this someday too. But instead, just doing it and letting you see her do that is super powerful.
Exactly. And it's funny because our family thinks like she created me to be this way. And like my grandparents and parents and whatever think she's crazy for running so much. And so they're like, what have you done to Pierce?
I think she did pretty dang good.
Exactly. To people who look at it the right way. But yeah, so I had seen this picture of possibility for what I could do. I do this half marathon, and then I was like, man, that was tough, but I was able to run it at a decent pace. I think it was like a hour 43 or so.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it was pretty decent.
And you were what, like 17, 18 probably?
Yeah. I forget how old I was, and then I was like, okay, well, I didn't think I could maybe do this before, but then I did it, and it was hard, but 30 minutes later, I feel fine. I'm not dead, really, like people think that if you try and run that far, like something crazy is going to happen to you. It's like, yeah, I don't know. So then a couple months later, so that was in August. In October is the Columbus Marathon, which is where I grew up. And that friend who didn't do the half marathon with me did the full marathon with me. And that was just another thing, me. It was like so cool to be able to accomplish something that I never thought was possible. A lot of people, don't do that kind of stuff, especially in high school. So you feel like special. And like I think any, kid or anybody wants that. And that's what I love so much about working with people and helping people. Like I'm sure you do when you help them run their first marathon. It's like they have this light bulb go off of like, man, what else is possible for me? Because I once didn't think I could do this marathon, and then I do it. and it's one of the most empowering beliefs that you can have.
There's so much confidence that comes from that, and I think having the maybe like the veil of a race to kind of use that as, or like the something to lean on to go out and do something challenging like a race, and then you do it and you're like, wow, like it's such a tangible thing,
Yeah, so tangible.
Yeah.
And I actually, thinking about this, I don't think I've talked about it much on a podcast before, but I really think that running has been one of the biggest confidence boosters that I've had in my life, because I grew up in a good situation. My parents were around, but my parents got divorced when I was 6 years old, and it affected me. They did the best they could, but if you're a product of divorced parents, it's inevitably going to affect you in a certain way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I grew up and I struggled with insecurity. I was jealous of other people and all these different things. So I was kind of in this negative mindset. But I've realized, not in the moment, but looking back on my running journey, is like, as I leaned more into it and as I did more and more races, it like boosted my confidence and helped me create, who I am today. And we still got a lot of room to grow, but still, it's just been like so amazing. And that's one of my biggest encouragements to people is like, you are a product of the decisions that you make. So if you go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to set this goal out, I'm going to do a marathon or a half marathon or a 5K, and then you train for it, and every day you're running and you're doing it and you're staying committed to it, you're strengthening that belief in you are who you say you are. And you're not like these negative emotions or negative feelings that you have about yourself. So
yeah, that's we were talking about that on our run this morning, where it's like you have to I think the reason that so many people don't challenge themselves or don't do these things is because they lack the confidence. They think, I can never run a marathon, or I can never do an Ironman or whatever. But as you start to, if you just sign up for something and just get started, and then through that process you start, running like 2 miles a day or 3 miles a day, and you slowly increase, you are always capable of so much more than you think you are.
Yeah.
And you start building this, again, tangible evidence for yourself that you are capable of doing these really challenging things. And it sounds like you experienced that firsthand.
Yeah, and funny enough, I was talking to a guy in the gym today, and he's like, hey, man, like, when's your next race, or what are you doing? And we started talking, and he shared with me that he'd been thinking about doing a half Ironman or an Ironman at some point, but was worried about, it taking too much of his time with training and stuff like that. And I'm looking at this guy. This guy's like a ripped CrossFit dude, like way more fit than me, it seems like. And I'm like, man, like, you just got to go for it. Like, yeah. He told me, like, I heard it's like a part-time job, training for these things. And, it's going to take so much time. And I'm like, dude, like, because I've seen people do some of these things without training much. I've seen people do these things, at faster paces by training a lot. But, like, you don't really have to train 20 hours a week to do an Ironman. Like, you could do it with less training, but, your time's probably going to be a little bit slower. But what's the reason you want to do it? Like, do you want to just do it so you can have that accomplishment and you don't really care so much about your time? Then okay, like, you don't need to train 20 hours a week.
Yeah.
So, and that's something I wanted to hit on with you and this audience is sharing that, like, I think I'm so blessed because I didn't listen to, or I just didn't know that much about the world of running, ultra running, triathlon, whatever, to know what was quote unquote normal, like in terms of training and ramping up and doing races and stuff. Like, when I ran 100 miles, like, I wasn't on a training plan. Like, I had done long runs, but I wasn't like following a plan with a coach. Like, I definitely recommend that. You'll get the best results you can, but I didn't have that because I didn't know. But the benefit of that is I didn't have limiting beliefs of, oh, I gotta do a marathon, then 50 miles, then this, and train for 16 weeks to get to this certain, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't have these mental limits. So then I was able to say, hey, you know, I think I want to get into Badwater at some point because I heard this guy talk about it, and you need to run 300-mile races to do it and qualify to even apply because there's an application. So I'm just going to pick 300-mile races and do it the next year. Like some people will say like, oh, you should only do one per year. And I just didn't have that concept of like what was normal. So then I just went out and did it. And that's the thing that I think led me to Ultraman is I just started doing these things without like listening to other people, because if I listened to a lot of the voices in my life, like they would question, oh, do you really think you could do that? Or are you sure? Like, are you well trained enough? What happens if you get really hurt? Or and a lot of times these people don't mean ill, but just because they have no concept for that world and those challenges, those environments, they limit themselves. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but
that was powerful, man. So what do you mentioned in there that you don't listen to people that are telling you these negativities or negative things, and then you don't have that negative self-talk either. Where was there a moment, was it maybe like during the half marathon or the marathon, where you just said, okay, I want to do these things? Or what do you think helped you get rid of that lack of confidence and gave you the confidence to do it? Was it just by continuously stacking these challenges on top of each other and completing them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the more that you do, the more that you realize is what's possible. Like for me, when I ran my first half marathon less than 4 years ago, I couldn't have imagined running 100 miles in a day. I didn't even know people did that. Like that was so outside of this world. But and even running a half marathon, because nobody I knew in high school had run a half marathon. I don't know if anyone did. Maybe I was the only one in my high school. I don't know. I'm not going to claim that, but I didn't know of anyone that had done that. So when I did that, I was like, I'm just going to try it. I'm going to see what happens. And so going from, man, is that even possible, to doing it and then doing more by doing the marathon, it strengthened that belief of like, hey, even if now I don't know how that's going to be possible, that's possible for me. And I love running because it's so tangible. Mm-hmm. Like you can set these goals in different areas of your life, but it's not quite as tangible because, or at least to me, because running, you have a date, you have a deadline, and then you do it and you either finish or you don't finish. There can be varying degrees of how well you do, but you either finish or you don't finish. So like I stacked a half marathon, a marathon, a half Ironman. Telling you the story of my first ultramarathon would be hilarious. I charted out a 1.08 mile loop around the campus of the University of Southern California.
What made you want to do this? Was this to try and get to the Badwater, or? So
I had heard about Goggins. I read David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me.
Goggins, dude, he's responsible for all these crazy people.
I know. So I heard his story about running 100 miles in a day, and I don't know, in some sick belief, I said, in my head, this is how I remember it, if this guy can run 100 miles without training, I could probably run 100 miles with training.
It's logical.
Yeah, right? So even though I didn't have a coach for 100 miles, I realized. But yeah, so I was like, well, maybe I'll start with 50. And so I know a lot of people, like at the time I had struggled with some mental health stuff and just being down and being a victim and all that kind of stuff that you go through growing up. And so I wanted to raise money for a charity. I had seen people raise money through charities through doing crazy endurance challenges. I'm like, wow, I can do a good cause and, do what I want, which is run a lot. And so I planned out this day. I said, hey, I'm going to run this 1 mile loop around campus during exam study days because, a lot of people at this time, they're going to be stressed about exams, but I'm just going to be like, man, like it's not all about exams. Like don't make that ruin your life. And so yeah, I put it on the calendar, and this is how I did. I said, okay, it's 1.08 miles, so I'm gonna run this loop every 15 minutes for 12 hours. I don't know why I said like I'm gonna do it every 15 minutes, because I'd run for like 10 minutes, stop and rest for 5 minutes, run, stop and rest, run.
You probably could have done it so much faster.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's an easy way to break it up mentally, I think.
But also, yeah, I thought, how can I break it up mentally? And I never run 52 miles, so like I didn't know how it was going to affect me. So I thought if I could get my legs up, I could stretch in between, it'd be helpful. And so yeah, that's the story of me running 52 miles.
Dang.
And it was very much thrown together. So that's something that people can take from this, is like, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, that's what I encourage people to. For your first marathon, don't try and like break a world record. Like, don't try and, hit us, like, yeah, maybe have a goal time, but it's more about getting it done and feeling what it's like versus achieving something crazy.
Man, okay, so you did the half marathon in high school, and then how long was it before you did that 50 miler? Was that was your next race after the marathon?
Yeah, so marathon was October of 2018, and then the 50 miler was December or November of 2019, so about a year.
Okay, and then was the 100 miler the next one?
It was so this is kind of funny. So I after I did that one, I was like, okay, every semester I'm going to do a big run for charity. And so that was in December of 2019, and then May of 2020 when COVID happened, I'm like, oh, this is a great opportunity to do a run for mental health for COVID. And so I stayed down that train. I did 60 miles. The reason being I wanted to do 100, but I was doing it. I was still at my parents' house in Ohio, and my mom was like begging me. She's like, Pierce, can you please not do 100? Just like do 60, because she was like worried about me. And just do less. Like, why can't you just do 50 or something?
It's like she's talking about drugs or something.
Exactly. No, I think like a lot of my family thinks I'm psycho or something. But yeah, so that time I did 60, and then that was May, and then like 6 months later I did 100.
Dang. And did you do the 100 the same format?
No, so because
it was similar. It was by yourself, right?
Similar. I had friends like run with me for part of it, but similar format. I made a 1 mile loop around my area, and then I said, hey, I'm gonna do. Well, I first started out, I was like, I'm going to try and do 5 of these an hour, and I was going on the hour. And then, your body goes through different things during that. Like, I walked some, and I just adjusted based on how I felt.
How old were you when you did that first 100 miler?
19.
19, dude.
Yeah, dude.
Was that, like, just a life-changing experience? Because I haven't ran 100 miles myself, but everybody says... they compare it to life in a day. That's what they call it.
Yeah, which is like such an accelerant, because you go through so many things. Like, you go through so many emotions and feelings and like wanting to stop and everything. Like, you're 12 hours in or whatever, and you've gone 60 miles, and you look and you still have 40 miles to go. Like, that's whew. But yeah, and then you like it just gets, because I think what happens is you're so exhausted physically and mentally, and like by the end of the 100, my feet had like started to feel like something was going wrong, almost like stress fractures or something. And like you finally finish, and everyone's like, you're hugging the few people that stayed around, because I finished at like 3 a.m, and like you're so exhausted, and then you're so emotional from finishing, so it's just like you just want to cry, like. Yeah.
Did those races, or it wasn't even a race, did those adventures, you could call it, that first 100 miler, did it leave you injured? Did you go through any injuries through some of those races, or did you come out just like with some general soreness?
Yeah. I wasn't feeling great like the next couple of days. Nothing like, yeah, just ran 100 miles yesterday. No, but like, I had some lingering like foot stuff, but after a month or two it went away.
That's great.
Yeah.
That makes it even better when you can get through it without
Yeah, like some
injuries.
people, like I've heard of people like getting in wheelchairs after the first 100-miler, and
Yeah.
I think too, like when you've been through sports growing up, your body's kind of resilient, and also being young too helps.
Right.
I don't really know the science behind it, but
Okay, so you did your first 100-miler when you're 19. Then where'd we go from there?
so it was weird. So I did that 100-miler in 2020, and then I moved out to Arizona. I worked a ton and worked for an amazing like company getting into sales, and so I kind of went away from running a little bit because I was so focused on work, and I ended up doing like, have you heard of rim to rim? Yeah, you did it.
Yeah, I hiked it. Did you run it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So
it's on my bucket list now.
Yeah, I did south to north to south, I think, right?
That's what we did. Yeah, the way we went was the Bright Angel from the south rim
Yeah.
up to the north rim and then back.
Yeah.
That's the way you did too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
There's a couple
I
different
was
ways
in
to
that
do it.
season of like working a ton, but one of my friends that I met at 29 out of 29, which you know about, right?
Is that the Jesse Itzler?
Yeah, you hike a mountain 13 times to do the vertical
Oh dang.
equivalence of summiting Mount Everest.
You've done that too?
Yeah,
Gosh.
so I was so inspired by Jesse. I signed up for that for 2020, but then it got canceled and moved back.
How is that compared to some of these other events? It's kind of like a good intro into that.
Oh, it's
ultra.
Perfect. I think that's what it is. It's the perfect intro because it's hiking, it's not running. It's like an event, a weekend. I think it's more fun than it is challenge. Like for me it was at that time.
Right.
Because I'd run 100 miles.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a lot of fun. Really cool God story. That's where I met Steve,
Nice.
which was awesome. But yeah, I highly recommend it for anyone thinking about it. So yeah, so I did that year. I did, what's it called? This is a good story for people to hear. So I was like, do I do rim to rim to rim? Do I not? Like I was so focused on work at the time, and the guy who I had met through 29 out of 29, I met him at this event. He's like, man, 10 years from now, are you going to remember, going to work that one day? Or are you going to remember doing rim to rim to rim? And I was like, you got a point there. And then I got the time off and then went to it. It was one of the most beautiful things that I did.
Dude, that trail is, one, it's beautiful, and two, it is humbling.
Yeah.
Just because the way that it's oriented is like it's all downhill for like 5 to 10 miles, and that's all uphill for another like 10, 15 miles, whatever, and then you just turn around and come back. So it's all downhill, all uphill, all downhill, all uphill. So you have like no reprieve from the climbing. Was that your first experience on trails or like more mountainous type of stuff?
Yeah. And I hadn't even trained for that. Like I was not running at the time, I was lifting. So I really went into that underprepared. So I think too, that's something to take away from my story is like, yes, like I totally, like I have a coach now. I have like one of the best coaches and I'm super regimented on my training and stuff. But to get into this stuff, I recommend like having a base, but like I think a lot of people hold themselves back because they're like, oh, I need to get to a certain point before I try, which I just didn't find is the case. Like I wasn't super well prepared. I paid for it during rim to rim to rim, but like I still got it done and it was an amazing fun time.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in going and doing some of these things before hiring a coach and just trying to figure it out on your own because you learn so much that way.
Yeah, because that's what you did too with running marathons, right?
Right, and you can fast track it with a coach and you can learn a lot of the same things, but I mean, I think there's definitely a value in trying it on your own first and then, learning your weaknesses and your strengths and then having a coach help you through those. But man, so we did rim to rim to rim.
Yeah.
And then where'd we go from here?
What did I do after that? So
Just too many to remember.
Yeah. Well, no, so that was about the time. So I had such an amazing time doing rim to rim to rim. And then I had an amazing time at 29 or 29 too. So that really like reminded me of my love for endurance sports and just like how amazing it is, the community, the people, how amazing you feel doing it, how amazing you feel when you're running consistently. Like that's part of why I run so much. It makes, and I'm sure you can attest to this, it makes you feel so good after. So I started to feel that, and then I was like, man, what would it be like if I could do Badwater? And for those of you who don't know, Badwater is a 135-mile race through the desert, from like Death Valley to the top of Mount Whitney, or not like top of Mount Whitney, but like the base of the trail.
It's known to be one of the hardest ultramarathons, right?
I think one of the hardest in the world, definitely in the United States.
Yeah.
And David Goggins again, I had known about it since I started getting into hundreds, and so it really brought that back to mind. I was like, man, it'd be cool to do that someday. And now, why not now? I was like, maybe I could be the youngest person to do it. And turns out there was some other young guy that did it that I couldn't be younger than because I was already older. But I looked up the qualifications, and to even apply to get into that, because it's a lottery system and you apply, and they actually select the people. It's not lottery, but you have to apply. You have to have done 3 100-mile races in the last like 12 months. And this is where, in the future, we just tell your guy to pull up on the screen, the qualification standards for Badwater.
I need my, like, Jamie over here.
Yeah. Come on, Jamie, throw that up on screen. Hey, I'm speaking that into existence right now.
In due time.
Yeah, in due time. It's going to happen, dude. But yeah, so you have to run 3 100-mile races, and they said on there, one has to be within the last 12 months. And so I kind of thought to myself, I'm like, well, I've done one, but it doesn't count because I like made it up myself. So what if I decided to do 3 the next year? And this was 2021, the end of 2021. And I look at they have like a set of races that are like some of the most difficult, so they look good on your application. One of them is the Keys 100. One of them is, which goes from Key Largo to Key West in May, so it's really hot. Leadville 100, which is like 100 miles through Leadville, Colorado, 15,000 feet of elevation gain, high elevation. And there were a bunch of these other ones, but those 2 stuck out to me just because of timing and location and stuff. I thought it'd be cool to do. And I said, I'm just going to go for those and figure out another 100 on the way. So I set them up and knocked him down last year.
Dang, that was 2022?
Yeah.
So you did the Keys, Leadville, and then did you have a third one?
Yeah, Brazos Bend was in December. Right. I did an Ironman too in the mix there. But that was more like, that was one of the hey, I want to do this challenge with my friends, because that's the one I did with Steve Weatherford. Because he had wanted to do that.
So Ironman?
Yeah. Okay. Ironman Waco, close, fun time with friends.
Jeez, so 3.
My friends, we don't go out to bars. We do Ironmans together.
Dude, it's all about who you surround yourself with.
Hey, 100%.
Who's gonna make you better?
Yeah.
Man, you've got to be one of the youngest people to do 300s in a year, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Do you know that?
I don't know if anyone like keeps track of that stuff.
I should.
Maybe one of the listeners can look that up for us. Who knows? But yeah, I think so. Like, I mean, that's kind of like an out there kind of thing to do.
So have you applied for Badwater since you completed those 3?
No, because I have like these goals this year that I'm going to do that like I can't really do any other races, and it probably makes more sense too to apply after I do what I've done, so then they look at these 2 years and they're like, oh yeah, we're definitely letting this guy in.
You did the 300s last year, and then a precursor for what you've got coming up this summer was Ultraman that you just completed a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
We
kind of took a long way, a long way to get to this point. But we set the context, because like I think a lot of people can see this and say, "Oh wow, you're doing Ultraman," but they don't see the backstory behind what. So I'm glad we did that.
It's important, yeah. Okay, so we're back to Ultraman, the appetizer for. That's quite the appetizer, I will say, for 2023. So Ultraman, what made you want to do Ultraman?
So that was like the story of Jesse, posting about that. And
okay, right.
And I had done, when I did that Ironman with Steve, we had worked with Natasha, who's a coach in Austin. She does great triathlon programming and stuff. And I was like, man, I like the difference of swimming, biking, and running too, as opposed to just running, because I'd gotten through a whole year of just run-focused training, and I was like, man, it would be fun to do a triathlon, and then had remembered that I wanted to do Ultraman Arizona, and you have to like apply to Ultraman Arizona. They don't just let anyone in. Like you have to apply. There's this long application, and you have to have done a Ironman to qualify. So that's what made me want to do it, and then that process of getting into it.
Okay, and then how was Ultraman? Like, let's hear about that whole experience. 'Cause
Yeah.
I've been dying to hear this for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, for sure. So, oh man, there's so much to it. Like it's such an amazing experience because you have to get there like on a Tuesday. The race is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, just because there's so much to go into it. And just I'll give you a grasp into that. Like you're covering 320 miles over the span of 3 days. And this bike, like for instance, the bike course, just one day, you're driving, like the crew is driving 171 miles following this bike route, like path that they've created. So you have to have a navigator, you have to have someone driving. And that's just like to make sure they can follow the course. Then you have to schedule like, okay, we're going to stop, here, this many miles in between each stop. We need your food, like what are you eating, what are you fueling with, and you have to get your crew on target with that. There's just so many things that go into it. Like you're the first day you're swimming 6.2 miles, so that took me around 4 hours. So you're swimming for 4 hours.
Jeez.
So during that time you can't just not eat anything. You have to eat things and fuel and drink. So, like, you have a kayaker that goes with you. And so that kayaker has to have all your fuel. And I don't know. There's just so many things that go into this race.
It's a team sport, for sure.
It is. Like, I was out there thinking, I'm like, man, this is, like, ultra endurance is almost kind of like a selfish pursuit sometimes because you just run the race, which is difficult for sure, but your crew has to take off the time from work. They have to drive around in the car and basically be like your servant for that long.
Could you do it without a crew?
No, so for this one, so like some races like marathons for sure, and Ironmans, there's aid stations everywhere, right? But for Ultraman, there's no aid stations at all. So that's what makes it so complex is your crew has to do all that fueling, all the monitoring you. Like if your bike breaks down, they have to help. There's a bike mechanic out there, but there's just so many parts to it.
Do you go into do you have like a routine going into a race like that, like mentally preparing yourself?
Yeah. So obviously I have this training block. I use a coach, especially getting into the super long stuff that I'm like some people, there are very few people who've even done that. Like there are only 21 people that did this race. And so like going into something crazy like that, I do have a coach. And so I had this whole training process and stuff dialed in that she programmed. And then before a race, I love the movie Rocky. So I watch that every time before, like either a night before, the day before, or whatever. So I'll watch that. I'll just make sure that I have all my fueling, all my nutrition, all that stuff lined up, and that my crew knows what I need. And really those couple days leading up to that is just about me, like relaxing, trying not to demand. Like I take training way down. I fuel. I don't do like a strict carb load phase or whatever. I just go into eating well, of course, but really just try not to stress too much about it because like the majority of the work has already been done, and now it's like okay, it's time to have fun.
Yeah. So much of these, especially the longer distance events, are just so mental.
Yeah.
Versus physical. Do you think that it's more mentally challenging versus physical? Obviously, like it's gonna be very physically demanding and hard, but do you feel like the mental preparation is almost more important than the physical preparation?
I think it's so much of both. But I've realized, and we've talked about this before, and then we talked about it too on the podcast a little bit earlier, is like realizing that like you don't take this too far, but like every decision you make is like creating who you are, right? And you're not like, if you make a bad decision, that doesn't mean like you're a bad person, but the culmination of what you repeatedly do has a big effect on you. So going into these races, I always like to really tighten up on certain habits, certain routines, certain things. Like, for instance, going into a race, I find like if I'm able to be in control of my body, my thoughts, and my like actions, like for instance, like getting in the cold plunge every day. If I get myself to do that, like I feel like a difference of, like during a race, there's a correlation between that allowing me to push harder or to stay more like in it and walk less or certain things like that.
Yeah.
So I try and do stuff like that before these races and too just in my day-to-day life that help build that like strength and persona, because I realized during my first 100-miler of 2022, the Florida Keys 100, towards the end of that, I mean, I was just so exhausted. It was so hot during that day, so humid, and it was really difficult for me to like force myself to run when I'm like 90, 85 miles in, versus like just kind of walk and speed walk through it. And like I was capable of running, but you know, after going 80 miles, it's a lot harder to force yourself to run than it is just when you're fresh, right? So I realized that, so I made these adjustments, and I think they really helped during that.
When you get to those moments when it's very, very mentally challenging and you kind of hit maybe like a roadblock or a mental block, do you have something that you tell yourself in those moments? Or like I asked you when I run this morning, like, do you have a relationship with pain, or do you treat it as a relationship?
Yeah, it's funny. Jeremy and I were talking this morning, and he was talking to me about pain, and I was like, what kind of relation, that question you just asked, and I said something. He's like, wait, save it for the podcast. So we're saving it for the podcast. I think when we were talking, you said, do you have a negative or like, how's your relationship with pain? And it's definitely, for me, like, it's definitely a relationship where when it comes, I'm not like, oh no, like, whatever, you know, this is going to screw me up. Like, you just expect it to happen.
Yeah.
Right? So for me, I know that if I get in the dumps in my head because I'm going through pain or going through certain circumstances, it's going to mess me up even more. Like I was watching a documentary about a guy who is doing a certain race, and through the documentary, during the race, he was talking about how much it hurt and how much pain he was going through and things like that. I was like, what are you doing? Like, why? Because you by doing that, you feed the pain because you're focusing on it, and so it's making it worse and worse and worse. Versus if I'm going through a race and I like don't acknowledge it, and I just like know it's there, but I'm just keep going. I'm staying positive. I'm not complaining about how it hurts so bad. Like, it's not gonna just magically like go away in an instant, but it will like go down in a way. And
So you think having it just comes down to positive versus negative mindset?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a lot of people, and this is where I'm different, like some people think like to get through different races and different challenges that you have to be gritting it all the way through it. And granted, maybe for some events, or if you're trying to run a certain pace or what, like you have to grit through. But really in these long ultras, what I found has worked really well for me is just like having fun. I mean, I don't do this to like make myself suffer. I do this to have fun. Like these races are amazing. Like I get to ride my bike for 10.5 hours through Phoenix, Arizona with the mountains, and it's sunny, and I don't have to worry about stocking up at for waters and hydration at gas stations. Like I have a crew that's fueling me. So I think like the gratitude and the positive lens that I see things through has really helped me through these endurance challenges. Because like, think about this: if you have two people and one person is like, man, you know, this sucks, but I'm just getting through it, you know, like kind of that mentality, versus like this person who's like just I think in my mind just like skipping around, like having a great time. Like I think that person wins all the time, because if you're enjoying it, you're much like you're definitely gonna be able to go further, is what I'm saying.
100%. I think you have to have that mindset, and that's something I've noticed with a lot of these endurance athletes, like Courtney Dauwalter, for example. She's like one of the most positive, like kind, just super, super happy people who just has that same mindset of like, wow, I'm in this beautiful area, I'm running, like I'm enjoying this is great. And you sometimes have to dip into the pain cave a little bit.
Yeah.
But do you have a why? Like, I know for me, like when I'm deep into a race, whether it's a marathon or an ultra or something, and I inevitably start asking myself at some point, like, why am I out here doing this? Do you ask yourself that? And if you do you have a specific answer that you tell yourself?
Yeah, and that kind of goes into why I'm doing these races, these challenges for this year, because it kind of, I mean, like if you think about it, right? Like, you know, me doing, if you look at it through this certain lens, like, okay, me doing an ultramarathon or an Ultraman, like a lot of people see that and they're like, okay, like why is, like, well, like you do this, but like what's the point of even doing that? And especially when you get late in a race where your mind's not as strong, like you can find yourself asking those questions like, why am I out here? Like this really hurts. Like why don't I just walk, or why should I really even push myself? Like things like that. 'Cause it's different. Like think about this to help give you perspective, because a lot of people probably haven't run 100-mile races or things like that yet. But think about like when you're like super tired, like maybe you pulled an all-nighter or you got really bad sleep, and it's the next day and you're making decisions. Like I bet you 9 times out of 10 that you're gonna default back into like bad habits, or decide to, you know, eat a little bit worse food rather than like eating super healthy, or work out hard versus like that you're probably not going to work out super hard. You're probably going to just like kind of mail it in the gym and those different things, because your mental strength isn't there, right? So that's how it is like late in a race. And so for me, a big part of, you know, my purpose is my relationship with God. Like, because through doing these races and through like going about my life, I realized, like, man, if it's just all about me, like that's just a poor way to live. Like, it's so unfulfilling. You just realize it's not the case. And so many things have happened in my life to put me to where I am in this amazing position that you just can't explain. Like walking into a coffee shop and meeting someone that I had looked up to for years, or just 29029 getting rescheduled. It got rescheduled to a couple months after I had heard Steve speak at an event. Like, so it was perfectly placed right after, and making that connection. So like a lot of those things have happened in my life to gear me towards growing my relationship with God. And so through these races, really my goal is to inspire people and show them what's possible through Christ. So through the relationship with God, it's like this thing on the side is Mission 413. That's kind of what I'm calling this set of challenges that I'm doing this year, because there's a verse in the Bible that says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And yeah, like that's not me saying like, okay, I'm not going to train it all and then I'm going to just try and wing it and rely on God to get me through a 200-mile race. Like, okay, let's be practical here.
It's like that saying of, I'm probably going to butcher it, but as long as the why is strong enough, you can do any how or something along those lines. Where, because you just inevitably get to that point during anything challenging where you start asking yourself, why should I keep moving forward?
Exactly.
And as long as you have an answer to that, I think you can always keep moving forward.
Exactly. And so through that, it's like, I want to be an example to people who were in my shoes, 4 years ago, who were insecure, who were jealous, who were whatever, who were victims, and show them what's possible. Because I never would have thought that I could do some of these endurance challenges that I'm doing now. And it took, like, think about this. Like, the reason that I'm a huge part, I mean, I'm the product of so many amazing people in my life, but a big part of that is seeing what David Goggins did and be like, oh man, like maybe that's possible for me. And imagine, if you could be the type of person that does that for other people.
I feel like you are doing that.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to, my best I
dude,
can.
Like I said at the beginning, you are very inspiring, encouraging to me, because I keep telling myself, like, oh, I want to do 100, but I want to get some more experience. I want to do it when I'm a little bit older, maybe like have more mental strength and maturity. And then I see you run a 100-miler at 19, you do Ultraman. Like, it's just, you're literally proving that it doesn't matter what experience or circumstances you come from, whatever. Like, as long as you're willing to put yourself out there and try it, like, you can do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and here's the thing too. So I explained earlier how, I think I really, like, looking back on it and analyzing it, I didn't do this consciously, but looking back on it, I've realized, like, I really leaned into the running because it made me feel, it, like, improved my confidence, but also I had people around me, like, the people who didn't think I was a complete whack job were, like, the other people who saw it as positive. They're like, man, that's, like, wow, like, you could do that. Like, they thought it was really cool.
Yeah.
So that made me feel great. And it's just, like, made me feel special, right? So I leaned into that. But what I realized after doing a couple of these is if I was just doing it for that, like, if I was just doing it for, what someone was going to say, or those sorts of things, like, it was going to leave me feeling super empty. Like, as if anything, like, if you just do things, because growing up too, like, in that circumstance, I cared way too much about what other people think and about me and all of that. And so that impacted me, but I realized, if I'm going to just do this because I want a certain response from certain people, like, that's going to make me feel super empty. So that's where my deeper purpose comes in, and I realized that it was more about that than me. So,
well, man, when I stopped giving a shit what other people thought, that was like, I mean, there's still moments where I consider that, but
yeah,
for the most part, it's like, I just do what I want to do. I don't care what people say.
Yeah.
That's a really important mindset to have.
Yeah, it's funny, like, and I don't know if you think about this ever, but sometimes I think about, like, not in, like, I'm curious, and I think it's interesting to think about, like, I'm like, I wonder what people who knew me in high school think about me now. Not from, like, caring what other people think about version, but just, like, I'm so different, and I'm so, like, I've changed so much. Like, I don't know, faith wasn't very important to me in high school. Like, I didn't do certain things because my friends didn't do them, and I tried to fit in, and I tried to be a part of this group and posse and whatever because I care what other people think of me. I cared about my social status. I cared about my image, all these different things. So I'm like, I wonder what, like, they think about me wearing a Jesus is King shirt and getting a cross tattoo and all that. It's just kind of funny. Man, like, not in a negative way, but in just like that's kind of funny way.
Well, we were kind of talking about it earlier where, like, don't try to be average. Everybody wants to be normal and be kind of like everybody else, I think, to fit in because it seems like the right thing to do. But you just have to, I think, to get where you want to go in life, you have to be different. You have to ignore all that shit and just do what you want to do and just not care what other people think. Anyways, let's tie this all back to Ultraman. So I haven't even talked about Ultraman really. So you did the 6-mile swim, 6.2 mile swim. I saw a video you were like swimming through like muck. Like,
dude,
I don't know what it was, but
dude. So last year the swim got canceled because like it was in this open area of this lake and the winds picked up. So they thought, okay, well we're gonna put it in this like side section of the lake, that's not like very as active, so the water's a bit more still, so that even if the winds pick up, it won't get canceled. But I think what happened was a couple days before there was this big rain, and so all the runoff came into this area and it just sat in there. So we were swimming through like tree branches. Jeez. Like I had a tree branch hit my head, and do you know those like things I think we call them burrs, like that those prickly things that attached to you.
Yeah.
Those in like bushes.
They're like super
typically.
sharp.
Yeah. There were those in the water.
Jesus.
Yeah. And so my like, because the water also was like 60 degrees, so it was cold. So I was wearing like gloves and booties and like a head cap, like a thermal cap. And so these burrs were like attaching to my hands, and I'm like, why do my hands feel like they weigh more? And I was prickling these things off. But it was, and this is a powerful mindset to have. I was going through that, and at first I was like, man, this sucks. Like, man, I wish if we could just have clear water conditions, it would be amazing. Like I didn't plan for that. All my swimming was in a pool. I didn't even do any open water swims before this. And I thought back to a video that I had seen from Jocko Willink, and it was like this video compilation or talking of him where basically when someone brought him a problem, he would say good.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. So like that
embracing it.
Yeah, that mindset of embracing it because it's going to make you better. And dude, I turned on that mindset and I was like, good, because if I have to deal with it, everyone else has to deal with it. And if I just have a stronger mindset than them, I'll probably do better. And I ended up being like the 5th out of the water.
Jeez.
So
okay, so we crushed the swim.
And also too, just small thing to interrupt you on. I don't think I came in 5th out of the water because of my strength and ability. The reason I say that is because there were probably 4 people that finished within 5 minutes of my swim time. So like they were right after out of the water for me. So yeah.
So you had a little bit of an edge, just
mindset
wise probably.
I think. So
okay, so you crushed the swim, and then from the 6.2 mile swim you go right into a how many mile bike?
90
mile bike. Was that first day like, I mean that's a long time to be out there, but how was that first day compared to the next 2?
First day was definitely easier.
Yeah.
The end of the swim, you feel a little disoriented because you're like lying prone for so long.
Right.
And then you stand up and you're walking, you're like hobbling back and forth.
You're in the water for about 4 hours?
Yeah.
Jeez.
So think about like laying down and swimming for 4 hours, exercising, and then trying to stand up after. And then you pull off your wetsuit and your hands are kind of frozen because it's so cold. And then you also have all this muck even inside of your wetsuit from that. So I had to clean that off, and right out of because you're up in the mountains, like the lake was so beautiful. It was right alongside the mountains, like right in between. But to get out of that park, you're riding through the mountains. So you're on these like roads where cars are whizzing by you at 65 miles per hour, going down these big hills, doing these big climbs. And I'm like, I was, you want to take advantage of the downhill, but I was on my brakes a little bit because I didn't want to, speed wobble into the main road, or I wanted to be safe. So
that's scary, dude.
It was, dude.
Because it's such a long course that they
can't shut it down.
Yeah. So it was on highways for the most part?
Pretty much. Yeah. They did their best to like keep it on less trafficked roads, but there were a couple there that were.
Jeez. So you finish up the first day.
Yeah. I felt strong throughout that. And I was like proud of that effort, because by the end of it, I felt like I could go longer. I felt strong. So.
Yeah, because that's comparable to doing like an Ironman. Because that first day took you how many hours?
9.5.
9. So that's like even shorter than an Ironman probably, right?
Yeah.
I don't know much about Ironmans, but okay. So you get up the next day, and you have a 170 mile bike. Mm-hmm. And how did that go?
So here's a funny thing on the first day of the bike, and then the first 90 miles, and then the second 171. So I had an amazing crew, but I didn't tell them as much as I probably should have before going into the race. So they didn't know necessarily what was required of them. And so they got lost one time. And so I went for 40 or 50 miles without a crew when I was wanting to see people every 17 miles.
Oh, jeez.
So nearly like three lengths without a crew when I would have needed to see them twice.
Were you without fuel for those miles?
I didn't get fueled. No, so I had stuff in my in your bike you have like this little bag pocket So I had like gels and stuff in there and waters in a couple different bottles and in containers. But yeah, I shouldn't have been able to last like that long and do so well. Like my performance was not affected one bit because of that. And like people can say what they want to say, but I think that's God working in my life, dude. Like that fuel was able to stretch way further than it should have. And I should have bonked or something because I didn't get that. And I was able to just power through. So
how far into the 170 miles did that happen?
So, well, on the first day that happened from like mile 18.
Oh, it happened twice?
Yeah. So,
oh, jeez.
So mile 17 to like 50. So that's like 33 miles.
Yeah.
And then it was like something to 60.
It would be
maybe
so
20
easy.
to 60.
It would be so easy in those moments to be like, fuck it. I like just pull over on the side of the road. Like, I don't want to keep going. I don't have my fuel. Like, this just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah.
What what was going through your head when that happened? Twice.
Well, I was kind of like, I was mad at my crew for a sec because I was like, dude, what are you guys doing? But then in my head, I was like, oh no, like it's probably not their fault. Like something probably came up, like out of their control, or who knows? Maybe it was my fault. I don't know. So I was like mad at them at first, but then I talked myself into being more like accepting of it and realizing like me being mad isn't going to do anything. And if you think about it, like no one intends to do wrong, really. Like a lot of people, like there's a reason things happen a certain way. And so it was probably just a mistake. And I knew that if I got too much in the dumps about it, like it was going to affect my race. And so I just like kept going.
Yeah, that seems super crucial to have that mindset in that moment.
It adds more to the story.
That's right.
Like if that wouldn't have happened, like me and my crew will remember that for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
So
after the 170-mile bike, how was it in between the days, like in the evenings? Did you just go and just house a bunch of food and try and get rest, or what did you do in between?
So they had a massage person at the finish line. So I had them work on me, ate a bunch of food. Yeah, just also like got my bottles and stuff ready for the next day. Tried to look at the course for the next day, make adjustments with my crew. But yeah, for the most part, I tried to just get to bed as fast as possible.
Did you have any issues with your bike? Because I know that seems to be a very common thing with tris.
Hand to God, dude. I didn't have one issue on my bike. Someone there got a flat 3 times in an hour. Oh my gosh. And I didn't have one.
And that's totally out of your control, right?
Totally. Like yeah, because you be prepared as best you can with like extra tubes and a bike pump and stuff like that. And there's also the bike mechanic. But think about it, over 171 miles, people like get spread out in between. Like the first guy, I don't even know times, but the first guy finished hours ahead of the last person. So if you're the bike person and maybe you're working on someone and then someone else gets a flat, you need to finish up, and then it could be an hour drive to the next person.
So the race had a bike, like maintenance or repair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
that's
specialized mechanic, which is, I'm sure, super helpful for those who needed it. But really, depending on, like, who knows, things could happen where you have a bike issue and it takes an hour off your time. And if you're coming in already thinking, oh, I'm going to be tight on time, and then you get a bike issue, that could steal your race. And going into it, I was thinking I was going to take 10 to 11 hours every day. Because that's the thing about these races is you have no idea, really. I mean, you can guess, but you don't really know what time you're going to come
There's so many variables.
Like, we've talked about this. It's so different from running a marathon where you do certain workouts where you pretty much know what your pace is going to be. Versus this, it's something you've never done before. And you don't know how the first day is going to affect your bike the second day. You don't know, for instance, the second day, the very beginning, we had headwinds, like crazy headwinds. Like I was pedaling hard and I was going 14 miles an hour.
Holy shit.
Like
that's like my fast bike. I'm not strong on a bike.
well, you get the right bike and you've been training for months on
I'll
biking.
blame it on the bike.
Yeah. But yeah, so like going like 13, maybe 12, even 11. When I'd be cranking, I just on like a flat road, I'd be going 20, 21, 22. And then like fast downhills, I'd be going 30.
Yeah.
So like that's really slow because of the headwind.
Right.
And so I don't know, there's just so many different factors like we talked about, but through that, you just have to keep that positive mindset, because if you, and maybe this is a mental experiment, if you start thinking, and everyone's going to be able to relate to this, if you start thinking about negative things like, oh, I wish this went a certain way, I'm so mad that this person didn't respond to me, I wish I would be here right now. Like, I just feel bad just thinking about that and just giving that example, versus if you think, oh man, I'm so grateful to be here, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, like, man, the sun is shining, I got 2 legs, like literally the simplest stuff. If you just start rehearsing that in your mind, it will completely change your state and then allow you to perform better. And that's one thing that I think helped me perform so much better than I thought I would, is like that mental state.
Dude, the mind is the most powerful tool we have.
Yeah.
And you can use it to your advantage, or you can let it mess you up.
Yeah. And I've let it mess me up before, but I'm like, man, I want to use it to my advantage.
Dude, so finish up the 170-mile bike.
Yeah.
And then the last day, the third day, is a 52-mile run, a double marathon.
Yeah.
How'd that go? How are your legs after the first 2 days?
Dude, they were tired. We had a little ice bath after the second day. That helped. But also, too, I don't know if you've ever sat on a bike for a couple hours.
A couple times, yeah.
Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, like the area where the saddle goes, like in your butt or just wherever that goes, you get sore, dude.
Yeah.
Like, so I was walking around kind of funny after the 2 days of biking, but really my legs weren't super sore.
It's a very unnatural position to be in.
Yeah, it's
weird. For basically 2 days straight.
Well, especially if you're in aero position.
Yeah.
And you're not used to it. Like, my low back was a little tight too. But yeah, so I'll tell you what. After I finished the second day and I'm in 9th place overall, I was getting a couple texts from people I know. Like, Steve texted me encouraging me, and then my triathlon coach texted me, and someone texted me, it was Natasha, and she goes something like, podium is in sight, like, you still haven't gotten to the run yet, you got this, like, you can do it, or something like that. So essentially just encouraging me, and like, I forget the exact text, but it was really powerful in what I needed right then. And I went from thinking, oh man, I'm gonna just run hard, to like, oh man, like, what's possible if I really run hard? Because, in triathlon, there's 3 things. There are 3 different sports, and running's obviously my best, and it was the last day I was running. And so it put something in my mind where, like, man, I'm just going to go out and I'm going to, even more than I was going to before, just lay it all out there. And, I shocked myself on that last day.
Dude, I saw a video of you coming into the finish, and you were just ripping. Looked like you were just fresh. I mean, I don't know what your pace was, but you were moving.
Yeah.
For the last mile of the end of the third day after this, like.
Dude, that's supernatural endurance, dude. That just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
But yeah, so that was my biggest takeaway from the weekend, is like, the way I was able to sustain, like, that was not natural. That was not me. That was this, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me,
I remember you kind of telling me about, at some point during the run, you knew there was a guy a little bit ahead of you.
Yeah.
And you kind of tracked him down.
Yeah, so I'll just give you the run kind of like play by play. So start off strong with the top 3 guys. We're all running together, and then I realized they were going to run faster than me, so I dropped back because I didn't want to like wear myself out too early in the run. And then I go the whole race without seeing anyone, like probably from like 5 miles in to 48 or something.
Jeez, you didn't see a single other runner?
No, like, I didn't see anyone. Maybe 8 miles, I don't know. But for a solid like 30 to 35 miles, I saw maybe 1 or 2 other crew vehicles. but I didn't see any other runners. And so I was just like out there alone all day, but I was running hard. I hit some dips like just after the halfway point, 27 or so, kind of hit a low. But then started running, walking with my crew. My crew helped me, pace me. And then something I do late in these races is I'll start taking caffeine. So caffeine will help you just like make you feel better overall, give you energy, especially late in these races. It's really beneficial tool.
Do you do that with hundreds too?
Yeah. Typically like the last couple hours.
Okay.
Yeah. But the thing is with caffeine, once you get on, you have to stay on it.
Right.
Or else you're going to like
just crash.
Yeah. So probably about mile 38 or 40, I start really like taking caffeine. Actually maybe a little bit before. But yeah, so I started, and dude, the race director is like medieval for this race. Like I even told her that. Like at the end of every day with who knows, maybe 5 to 10 miles left, she planned, like I don't know if it was her who planned it or who did it. But there's a big climb at the end of every day. So it's like you've gone for 7, 8, 9 hours, and then there's this big climb. But then the good thing is everything feels like downhill from there.
Yeah.
So we do this big climb. It's an out and back. And as we're doing this out and back, I have several people tell me, this guy's, a mile ahead of you. This guy's probably 10 minutes ahead of you. Whatever. So I'm aware of this, and we're doing this out and back in the turnaround, which is the turnaround's at like 40 miles in, and I know that it's a turnaround, so I know I'm gonna see this guy. So I'm like trying to figure out how far I am behind him. I figured out I was like 8 minutes behind him or something like that. But dude, it's interesting. Late in these races, you have to know yourself too, to know what you're motivated by. Because like in that moment, I was more motivated, and this is weird, like some people may think, oh, that's not a good belief or whatever. But I'm more motivated by someone not passing me than passing that guy. Like in that moment, I was like, yeah, that guy's 9 minutes ahead of me, but I'll do the best I can, but I don't really care about passing him too much. Just because you're so worn out, you just want to be done. In my book, I wanted to be done.
I think anybody would want to be done at that point.
Yeah, but you got to find what you can use as leverage, right, on you. And so I want to be done, and so like we come out from this out and back. I end up seeing my crew, and they're like, "Bears, he's only half a mile ahead of you, and he's having troubles. Like he's having stomach issues, like." Or he's slowing down something. You got to, like, no, they didn't say, they said, do you want to pass him? Like, we believe you can. Do you want to pass him? We're going to really have to push you, though. And in my mind, I'm like, man, no. I don't want to pass, like, I don't want to push myself crazy hard because can't you already tell? I'm already super crushed. But that's like what I'm thinking in my head, but like without me even really realizing it, I just say yes. Like without like thinking it through, before I could rationalize that I didn't want to do it, I said yes. And so my buddy hopped out of his car and started pushing me, and he's like, "Let's go!" Like, and it was actually encouraging me really well. Shout out Ryan Wilson. He got everything out of me, dude. That's really awesome. Motivated me. 'Cause like you're in a fragile state towards the end of that race where like I've been in races and people have been trying to push me, and I'm kind of like, man, screw you. I've already done 90 miles. Like I don't want to hear that. Like I just want to be done. So he did a great job. And then, dude, we see this guy, and he's probably 200 yards ahead of us, and we see him walking.
Oh man!
And we had just been running real fast to catch up, so we're like, all right, like we're kind of whispering at this point because we don't want him to hear us, and we're like, all right, let's recharge, like let's slow down. so that when we pass him, we can blow by him.
Oh yeah.
And
taking his soul.
Exactly, because you don't want to pass someone walking, because like if you're walking, because then they're just gonna be like, oh well, if I just start running, I can pass you back. And so we didn't want that, because I didn't want to get into a fight, like back and forth, because I knew that I needed to like strategically use my energy. And yeah, so we charged up a little bit. He starts walking, or he starting to jog. And then we get to a point and we just go right by him. And Ryan had been like looking back a little bit. I was like, don't look back. Because like we want to be so confident that like there's no way he's catching us.
Yeah.
And then we keep going for a couple minutes. Dude, I wish I would have pulled up my phone. Jamie, throw it up. But mile 48, okay, so I'd started running, 8:15s, 8:30s at the beginning of this race, and I held 8:30s for a while. But then I was running 10, 11, 12-minute miles, because I was running a mile, walking for a minute. And then, dude, I get to, like, this point where we're chasing him down. Mile 49, this is not exact, but mile 49 or so, I run a... or no, this is probably 47. I don't know. The exact one doesn't matter. I run a 12-minute mile. The next one I do a 10. The next one I do a 7:28.
Holy shit.
The next one I do like an 8:30, and the next one I do like a 7:26 or something like that.
That's incredible.
And so like that doesn't happen like 50 miles into a race. You don't run your
to
best
negative
miles.
split.
Yeah. And so we blew by him, and then we got like 1,000 yards ahead of him, and we started slowing down.
Jeez, man.
Yeah.
I think at that point in the race, you're just looking for any kind of extra motivation or anything that's going to give you that boost.
Yeah.
Whatever it might be.
Yeah, you kind of have to like, and that's the value of like doing several of these, is to realize like what pushes you.
Yeah.
Like I'm very much motivated by like right now, like we've talked about caring what other people think. I don't like care what other people think. As much as I like, people can say something to me and like spark a fire in me. Like if someone like is like, oh man, you don't work that hard, or like, oh you don't like, I'm like, oh I'll show you. So like my cousin during the Keys 100 said like, man, like if you feel like you could be running now but you're walking, why aren't you running right now? This is like,
oh man,
it's like 85, 90 miles into the run, and I was like, I'll show you. And so I ran the last like 5 miles or something.
That's so funny.
Yeah, so you just, through experience, you realize how to motivate yourself.
Man, what place did you finish in out of you said it was 19 people that started?
Yeah, I finished third in the run on the third day. Yeah, and then, and the other guys had done like several Ultramans before.
Wow.
And then overall, I went from, so I was 9th at the end of the second day to 4th.
Jeez.
Finished 4th overall.
That's awesome, man. So 4th overall, and you're the youngest person to ever do Ultraman Arizona, right?
Yeah.
Man, that's amazing, man. So crushed Ultraman, and now you're switching gears a little bit into what?
Triple Crown at the 200s, baby.
Dude,
so a lot of people don't probably know what that is, but it's 3 200-mile races, and those are runs.
Dude, I keep hearing people say 200 is the new 100.
Oh, you keep hearing that?
I've heard that several times.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just like the psycho communities we're a part of that do these things. But do you think that 200 is the new 100? Like, because before 100 was like unfathomable. I mean, nobody did it till like the 80s, and it became so mainstream and popular that now everybody can do it.
I think it's funny because I think that we probably think it's so mainstream, but like to the general public, it's still like, what? But yeah, I do. Like, there are very few people that used to run hundreds. Now there's a lot. So I think that it's just because more people are running hundreds that 200's going to become the new like kind of unfathomable thing.
I'm scared to where it's going to go after that. After that becomes more mainstream.
Yeah.
So what are the three?
Might stick in 200s or 100s.
So what are the three 200 that you're doing?
So it's Tahoe 200, Bigfoot 200, and then the Moab 240. So those are like June, August, and October.
I love that they just round down the 240 to it and just call it a 200, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and like Tahoe and Bigfoot are both longer than 200. One's like 206 and one's like 210.
At that point, I mean, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, 6 miles extra. What?
It'll be fine. Which one of those 3 are you looking forward to the most?
I don't know. I'm looking forward to all of them. The next one, I think I try and do my best. I mean, I don't always do a perfect job, but I try to do my best on just focusing on the next race, because if you think like too far ahead, like you're not going to enjoy the process of like training for, because that's the thing for these 200s, like in 100s and races and things like that, like you the way majority of the time that you spend is like spent preparing for these.
Yeah.
And then like race day is kind of just like the reward almost. Like, yeah, you have to dig deep and you have to push yourself and battle through some hard times, but really, like if you do it right, the majority of your like time and investment is on the front end.
Yep. Dude, I tell everybody that, even with marathons.
Yeah,
like,
even with marathons, 100%.
It's you consider like a 4-month training block. Like you have several like 18, 20, 22 mile workouts. In my experience, those are harder than the marathon, because if you can show up and do those successfully, like that gives you all the confidence, physically that you're in shape to go and crush the marathon. And so I think that's where all the growth is in the training. And then like you said, the race is just the cherry on top. Which one do you think is going to be the hardest? Is there one course in particular that's known to be harder?
I mean, 240 is like the
sense.
longest, but also it doesn't have as much elevation gain. I think Tahoe is supposed to be difficult. I mean, they're all going to be difficult, but I don't know. When you get into doing very difficult things, it's more of the same in a way. Like in my mind, like I don't think 100 miles is very different from an Ultraman, even though there are different intricacies for swimming, biking, running, whatever. I think they're all like generally kind of the same, because they require like that same mindset, the same, like even though swimming and biking is different motions, like it's a similar feeling how you feel when you do them for a long time.
That's why I think you mentioned the cold plunge earlier. I get that same sensation, same mental state when I get into the cold plunge as I do late into a race. Because it's the same part of your brain, I think.
Yeah.
I think Goggins calls it, this is the way I look at it at least, or this resonates with me, is Goggins calls it the 1 second decision.
Yeah.
Where when you're in that mental state, you're just constantly asking yourself every single second, can we be done yet? Can we be done yet? Can we quit yet? Can we quit? And you just have to keep telling yourself over and over and over, no, no, no. And it's just whatever part of our brain that triggers, it's the same thing across all these different disciplines or challenges.
Yeah, I totally agree. Cause like one second of you deciding to quit like ruins your whole day.
Yep.
And the more that you stay on the positive side, I think the less that you will make that decision.
So you're talking about like not looking too far ahead and just focusing on that race that you're about to take on. Is that kind of how you chunk up each race themselves, of like, okay, just worry about this next mile or just get to this next aid station? Is that how you can break everything up?
That's actually a really good question, because I think a lot of people wonder about that. And it's important to focus on that, because if you think during an 100-mile race, okay, I'm 10 miles in, I have 90 miles left. Okay, I'm 15 miles in, I have 85 left. 20 miles in, 80 left. Like, you're just going to mentally, like, be so tired fast during the race. So for me, it's like, okay, I'm just chunking it down until the next time I see my crew, or the next aid station if I'm going by aid stations. Or for this race, because we had to like navigate, I had this bike computer on my bike that would show me directions, and it would just show me like the cue. Like, it just showed me, okay, and you're on this segment for 5 miles, then turn right. So all I was focusing on was like those 5 miles. And I think that really helped me. Like, I didn't even see, like, for the most part, I didn't even see my speed or my watts or whatever. I just focused on, like, okay, 5 miles and then turn right. 10 miles going straight. Okay, I'm just focusing on that. Because if you get, like, if you build it up in your head too much, it's going to feel like, oh, man, this is never going to end.
Do you try to be present? Because that's one thing that I really have noticed with running is it's very difficult to not be present. Sometimes your mind will wander off on something, but very quickly your mind usually comes right back to, okay, we're running and we're doing this right now, so we got to be present and focused on this. Do you intentionally try to be present, or do you let your mind wander? Do you try to think about other things?
I think all a mixture of both. During races, sometimes I'll listen to books to help the time go faster. Definitely don't listen to music just because it's so short. So, like, one song, like, it takes so many songs to get through certain things, and then I don't know, songs are too short for me.
That makes sense.
And also when you listen to a podcast or books, it helps you lose track of time. So yeah, but during this race, Ultraman, they don't let you listen to anything or wear any headphones or whatever. And so what happens there is, like, and the reason is because, you know, cars are going by. They want you to stay focused. Obviously, swimming, you can't anyway. But what happens there for me is it does force you to be present in the moment. And all I'm focused on and thinking about during this is, like, okay, when's the next time that I'm going to see my crew? Just from a strategic standpoint, like, okay, I'm going to fuel up with this when I get them, change this bottle, get this bar, whatever. And then I'm just, like, kind of enjoying it. Like, I'm, like, for the bike, I leapfrogged with one guy, like, a couple times. And since, you know, they don't block off the roads, there's red lights. So, like, we'd talk and stuff. Like, it's very much like a fun, competitive nature. Like, those people are competing against themselves, you know, and I was too, except for that last guy. But yeah, it's more so for fun than anything else.
So what made you decide to do the Triple Crown? Was there a certain thing?
Yeah, I mean, the story about Badwater, I was going to do Badwater, but the beginning, before, I think this was before I had even done any of the hundreds that I was doing last year, I saw a post from Candace, who's the race director for these, and she said 200 is the new 100. And so I was like, what does this mean? And I went on her website, and they were advertising, it was in May of 2022, they were advertising the Triple Crown, and they were doing some deal where if you signed up for all three of them, you'd, like, get into all of them no matter what. Because, like, for those races, they can only have so many people on the course, so there's a lottery system. So, like, only a certain amount of people make it. And I was like, dang, well, I don't know if I'll get into these races because of the lottery drawing. Like, I don't know if my name's going to get drawn. So I was like, well, I'm just going to sign up for all of them. And so my plan changed from doing Badwater this year to 3 200-mile races.
Dude, I love it, man.
So, yeah, I don't know. I'm just so fascinated with what's possible.
Yeah.
And I've seen it so many times where, like, I didn't think I could do something and then I did it. Or like, not many people do Ultraman. I didn't, like, I always thought it was possible for me. Like, I didn't really have any doubts that I was going to be able to finish. But you just wonder, like, okay, well, like, what's my time going to be? Like, how hard is it really? Like, those kinds of things. So
I think you'll definitely experience that during the 200s is finding out how hard it's going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I can't even fathom 200 miles. I the most I've done is 50, and even just trying to think about 100, I'm like, there's no way. It's so far. It's so much time. But again,
I guess you're experiencing the same kind of feeling that I'm feeling now, because I'm like, I can't imagine, knowing how I've been at the end of a 100-mile race, I can't imagine saying, okay, go run another 100 miles.
Exactly.
So you're like thinking 50 versus 100. It's double.
Yeah. I think that's kind of a natural progression, though, because that's how I was, and you're probably the same way. I think you mentioned earlier, after you finish your first half marathon, if somebody said, okay, now turn around and go do it again, you're like, no chance I'm doing that.
Yeah.
That's so far.
Yeah.
But then you do a marathon, and you're like, oh, that wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
And then somebody says, hey, go turn around and turn into a 50-miler. You're like, no way. It's just this natural progression of doing
stacking.
stacking the challenges and the accomplishments on top of each other.
Yeah.
But man, I'm super excited to see how the Triple Crown goes for you. I'm pumped for you.
Dude, I'm super glad that you're excited about that. And like, I don't know, I was talking to Jeremy about this before. I'm like, this is going to be different and cool because like, you know what training for races is like, you know what preparing for races is like, you know what goes into it, and the nutrition and the travel and the fueling, all those different things, where you can appreciate like the small details, like what happens like at the end of day 2 of Ultraman where you biked 171 miles, like how are you feeling, like what is that like? So I appreciate you.
Well, I mean, it's just genuine curiosity.
No, I know you're not like faking.
Oh,
you're
no,
actually very interested.
Yeah, I think
that's awesome.
I don't know, this is all just so fascinating, and I think the sport of ultra is still so young.
Yeah.
Which leads me to my final question here is okay, I know you're going to crush the Triple Crown of 200s. Where do you see yourself going from there? Like, or even in 10 years from now, like where do you see yourself going with all this?
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like God's guided me from like one thing to the next, and like doors have been opened, doors have been closed, and things like that to really guide me through that. Like I told you, I never thought I'd do an Ultraman or run 100 miles or different things like that. Just kind of like the next thing. So I like to have things planned out. Like, okay, I'm striving for this big goal in 5 years, and this is where I want to be. But I don't really know, you know? I love what I do. I love the work that I get to do. I love having flexibility to do these races. And I love like the impact that it's having, like having people run their first marathon and stuff like that, first half, first 5K, different things like that. Like one of my biggest wins that weekend for doing Ultraman was one of the guys on my crew, doesn't run at all, had just been more focused on lifting, and he's like, man, I'm gonna set the goal to do a 5K. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, and like a week or two later, he ran a 5K,
Dang.
his first 5K. So I'm like, man, that's amazing. That's what I want to do. That's what I want the impact it on people to have.
Yeah.
So all that to say, I don't have like a picture perfect, clear destination with it, but I just know the next thing will open up.
That's great, dude. That's what it's all about. I think everybody thinks that they have to have an answer to that question, and I definitely don't, and I don't think a lot of people do. But as long as you have that mindset, like you just talked about, of just keep doing what you want to do, keep being the best that you can be, and inspiring people along the way. That's all you can do. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like, I think for me, like I can focus. You can only focus on so much. And so for me, it's like, okay, I'm focused on doing these races, to where like, if I had this goal this is how I think about it. If I had something else or so much to think about down the line, it would kind of distract me. Like for instance, if I think about this, if I was 3 years ago or 4 years ago, before I ran my first half marathon, if God sat me down, like just in a like make believe sense, like this like doesn't actually happen. Like obviously God is real, I think, but not like God's never sat me down. But you got what I'm trying to say.
I got you.
And said, Pierce, you're going to run a half marathon, then you're going to run a full marathon, then you're going to run 50 miles, then you're going to run 100, then you're going to run 200s. I'd be like, what are you talking about? like I don't know. I feel like I'd just be so overwhelmed by that. Mm-hmm. So thinking about it like that, it makes me like focus on just the next thing.
Yeah.
Because I can't even fathom what God has for me in like my future. So
just gotta be present and
Yeah,
enjoy what
dude.
you're doing right now.
Yeah, have fun.
That's
Like,
cool, man.
yeah.
One last point on that. I think it's Goggins. We've talked about him a lot, but he has this mindset of like, when I die and I get to the gates of heaven or wherever we end up, like, and God's like, man, this was the plan I had for you. You were supposed to, you know, go be a Navy SEAL and do all these races and do all this stuff, but instead you just stayed as like this exterminator or whatever he was doing. It's like, I think it just comes down to regret at the end of your life. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, have to deal with that when they're, you know, on their deathbed. Like, man, there's all these things I wanted to do, I probably should have done, but I just never took action on it. So I just love that you're just fucking doing it, man. You're doing it and you're having fun with it.
Well, yeah, and two, just one other thing to add on top of that is there's actually 2 parts of the Bible where it talks about that. There's this guy who ends up going to heaven, or ends up like dying and then seeing God, and he goes, you know, I prophesied in your name, I cast out demons, I did all these different things. And Jesus says, turn away from me, I never knew you. Because like he'd never had a relationship with God. Versus like there's another outcome that's in the Bible that it talks about where someone, you know, goes to heaven and God says, well done, my good and faithful servant. So really that's the goal of the reality, is like, hey, I just want to be a good and faithful servant. I don't want to get to heaven and think, and God say to me, turn away from me, I never knew you. Because, you know, I never knew you intimately in a relationship, and you didn't like become who I created you to be, you know? And that's not like to put sort of like a bad taste in anyone's mouth of like, oh, if I don't do enough, God's not going to love me. But like, if you don't, I don't know, that's kind of an incomplete thought in my head, but like, I think I've got it across as best as I
think you did
as I could, and people will understand that. So
yeah, man. Well, let's end it right there. Pierce Showe, thanks so much for coming on, man. Where can people find you and follow along in your badass journey?
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you for feeling that way about me. I would say just Instagram. Go to Pierce Showe. It's pretty simple on the gram. That's where I keep most of my stuff updated, and race updates and all of that. But yeah, man, thanks so much for having me on the show. I can't wait to see where this goes, and can't wait to be a listener as well. So,
yes, sir. Well,
thank you, and thank you for everyone who's listening in.
Yeah, man, I'm super excited for your journey this summer. Can't wait to hear all about it. Probably have to have you back on to tell that story too. But
yeah,
this was fun, man.
Awesome,
thanks again.
dude.
All right.
Thanks, man.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you in the next one.